Today, I'll be continuing my arc of watching weird shit and being annoying about it on YouTube. I know I'll be getting a few complaints in the comments, but in my defense, you guys keep clicking on these videos. But today's piece of animation is weird even for me, and under normal circumstances I would have never voluntarily watched it, except this time it was recommended to me. But real quick before I continue, I know I'm going to get a lot of comments confused about the fact that you can see my face, considering that's not something I normally do. Long story short, I'm working on a big video that'll require me to be on camera because have you ever tried getting B-roll footage of a book? Doesn't work. So basically, I want to get some practice with both being on camera and editing that kind of footage so I can make that video as good as possible. This is all very new to me, so if any of you are knowledgeable, please do give me any advice you may have about camera presence, lighting, or anything else in the comments. I promise you, my setup is like 10 times as scuffed as it looks from your end. My phone is streaming to OBS, my chair is holding my ring light and the tablet I'm using as a makeshift teleprompter, I've got a cheap studio light sitting on a stool that's sitting on a table just over there. Trust me, I could use the tips. Oh, and watch the Villain Arc podcast. I'm one of the hosts, it's pretty good. Link in the description. So back to the main topic, this story begins as many strange and horrifying stories do. On Twitter. The background is there's a bit of controversy surrounding a voice actor who does anime dubs. He had a few takes about white actors playing black characters and vice versa. You know how it is. Opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one and it's become trendy to share it online. I'm not going to comment on this controversy because I have a strict no political opinions on YouTube rule, but you do need to know that this controversy exists. So the reason this is relevant is that fellow anime YouTuber Natalie Hunter ended up giving her own very polite response, but it's actually the tweet right under it that brings us to today. Also, I played a black lesbian in some critically acclaimed xenomorph porn. It's called acting. Now, I never thought I'd see that particular combination of words come together like that, and I said as much in reply. And she told me, check it out, you like weird stuff with surprising artistic merit. She had me there. So I was like, damn, I guess I'm gonna have to watch this thing, aren't I? And after a bit of digging, I discovered that the work Natalie was referencing was Icarus by Nest Labs. Currently there is one episode released, though there is a second in production. For obvious reasons, I can't exactly link anything, but I've left enough info in this video already that you'll be able to find it easily enough if you're interested. So as the word xenomorph has probably already given away, Icarus is based on the Alien franchise, which, full disclosure, I have not gotten around to watching yet, but it's on the list. In the unlikely event that any of you don't know what that is, it's a sci-fi horror franchise with deadly aliens, with the three iconic ones being the xenomorph, the facehugger, and the chestburster. It's an icon of the 80s. So Icarus starts out with a group of soldiers responding to a containment breach, and I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about the visuals a bit. Icarus was made with Blender, which is very popular for 3D indie animation and adult animation in particular. And while I'm no expert when it comes to the technical side of animation, I have to say that this looks to have been done very well, especially for an amateur studio. Overall, the models and animations were smooth and just generally looked good, while avoiding many of the issues that can often be seen in Blender animations. Sizes and shapes generally remained consistent throughout. I didn't see any of the awkward squash and stretch you'll see in a lot of Blender works. I only caught one instance of serious clipping when a woman's foot went through her leg, and I was actively looking for clipping issues. And most impressively, everything felt like it had actual impact. Like when one model touches another, things more or less move and shift as you'd expect. As far as negatives go, some of the walking animations were a bit stiff, the adult animations were sometimes noticeably rigid, though that actually works when it's a xenomorph scene to highlight their inhuman nature, and the lip flaps don't perfectly match the dialogue, giving it a bit of a video game cutscene feel. Also, the model's skin texture would often get that glossy sheen that's so common in Blender animation that makes the models kinda look like they're made of plastic. I've never worked with Blender, so I can't say for certain, but it must just be something that's really difficult to deal with because it's exceptionally common. But overall, this thing genuinely looks fantastic. So back to the opening scene, spoiler warning from here on out by the way, we can immediately see that it's doing the Alien thing where it's setting up a horror scene with the soldiers making their way through a spaceship with the lights are out, but it's highlighted by red warning lights and the green lights of their weapon sights. They know the Xenos are out and about, but they're just out of sight for the time being. One soldier confirms that the Xenos are free, and they suddenly attack. One soldier gets picked off by one hanging from the ceiling, and the other two get got by one jumping from the shadows. Then that's the title screen, followed by a jump to 8 hours earlier. So one thing I do need to get across is that Icarus does a lot of its storytelling via the visuals. And unless I do basically an in-depth shot-for-shot analysis, which I really don't want to do here, it's going to be hard to convey a lot of it. It definitely does a lot of the horror thing where it'll show you something to freak you out, rather than having a character actually say, oh hey, look at that freaky thing. But in this instance, we see our protagonist, the lieutenant, looking at a xenomorph through a glass panel, and then a camera pan reveals another xeno in the background breeding with a human woman. The exact circumstances are never made completely clear, but a brief bit of expositional dialogue between the lieutenant and the executive officer reveals that the woman had been put in there 16 hours prior at the behest of the company. It may be referencing an entity from the actual Alien movies, but again, I have not yet seen them myself. It's pretty clear that the crew aren't exactly enthusiastic about their assignment, but they're doing their job nonetheless. We then get a few really nice shots that establish a bit more of the atmosphere and the situation without any dialogue. We see the ship itself floating in deep space with some text confirming that it's a research vessel known as the USCSS Icarus. We also see a bit of the labs where researchers are observing a bunch of pods that all contain women with facehuggers on them, and some are noticeably pregnant. It then pans to a tank containing xenomorph eggs. So even though we're never actually told the specifics of what's going on, we can see through context clues that the crew is studying this xenomorph's reproductive habits in some capacity, and we also pretty efficiently get shown the primary difference between this universe and the original Alien universe, which is that the xenomorphs have an alternative means of getting the process started. I wasn't familiar with the details of how this whole thing works in the movies, so I did a bit of research and was actually left a bit more confused than when I started, since I'm actually not sure what the xenosex is supposed to really accomplish in the Icarus universe. If I had to guess, it's a third means of producing a xenomorph egg. See, the canon means of getting an egg are either one is laid by the queen, they're a hive species, or if a queen is not available, they can coat a host in goo that'll slowly devour them and transform them into a weaker but still viable egg. That egg hatches a facehugger, which implants a chestburster into a host, which is essentially a baby xenomorph. So I'm guessing that in Icarus, xenomorphs can also deposit eggs into a female host where it'll then act as a parasite for some time. Not 100% sure though. If anyone from Nest Labs is watching this, please let me know in the comments because I'm curious. But back to Icarus, accompanying these opening shots is the song System Overload by Jagged K, which is a beautiful soft rock ballad that impressively manages to serve two purposes. The soft intro highlights the loneliness of space and the uncomfortable reality of what everyone is doing, but it continues playing into the next scene where we see the lieutenant and executive officer engaging in some extracurricular activities together, and it's the one vanilla H scene in the episode. One thing I like about this section in particular is that it uses this loving, tame scene so that the darkness of the horror gives the viewer complete tonal whiplash, but in a good way. So on the one hand, there are a few moments where it'll explicitly flick between the two women and a xenomorph scene. I obviously can't be showing you any of this, but there are a lot of times where the two pairs will use near identical animations, just with different models, and it'll flash from one to the next and then back. And on top of this, there's a really nice use of color. The two women are not well lit, but they do have a soft warm light on them, whereas the xeno scenes are all dark and harsh. And the music will also switch whenever the scene switches from System Overload to a more traditional horror sound. There's also some glitchy audio effects and distortion that's very clearly designed to make you uncomfortable, and I think it was done brilliantly. So of course, the xenos break free and one interrupts the two officers. System Overload fades out and we're in full-on action horror mode now. The XO attacks the Xeno to distract it, sacrificing her life to allow the lieutenant to escape. She doesn't get very far though, and after a brief but very creepy horror sequence, it becomes clear that the Xenomorph doesn't want to kill her, but would prefer something else instead. She acquiesces, and we have exactly the scene you'd expect. So obviously this scene is supposed to be pretty uncomfortable, and I think it accomplishes that pretty well. But I also feel like this is the one scene that does ultimately feel more like fetish material than anything else because it does kind of overstay its welcome. Granted, I'm sure fetishists, of which I am not one, are a significant target demographic, but it does kind of feel out of place when every other adult scene feels like they exist purely for artistic value and any erotic value is purely incidental. I mean, just the sex alone goes on for 4 minutes, which may not seem like a lot, but this is a 22-minute work including credits. And that's not even mentioning that the Xeno immediately then takes her to the hive and they fuck for another 2 minutes, making this really more of a 6-minute scene overall, almost a third of the entire runtime. Again, it does do its job of being disturbing and showing the LT surrendering and losing all hope, but I do feel like it dragged on for longer than necessary. And also, this is the scene that has that clipping I mentioned earlier. I'll try to show a picture of it here. I should be able to crop it so that it doesn't show anything NSFW. The next scene is very creepy. The LT is in the hive surrounded by eggs. Facehuggers hatch and she willingly lets them latch onto her, though as you might imagine given the nature of Icarus, they hug more than just her face. And the last thing we see before the credits roll is her very pregnant stomach wriggling, which I assume is meant to mean that the chestburster is coming. There's also a brief post-credit scene of another character having a nightmare. I assume this would mean more to me if I was familiar with Alien, and I'm sure it's a teaser for episode 2, but as is, I don't recognize the character. So overall, as a pure horror experience, I thought it was pretty good, and despite the fact that this really isn't my thing like at all, I enjoyed the experience very much. It was very competently done, and it really sold the xenomorphs as this primal and bestial threat, though not one that acted with any deliberate malice. I also find that the sexual content can definitely enhance horror, as it provokes a visceral reaction that's hard to replicate with other means. The one thing I'd complain about that I haven't already discussed is that I'd have liked to see a bit more of the psychological element, because I was left with some questions, but not in a good way. Specifically, I want to know how the LT ended up embracing her new role. Like, she watched her girlfriend die, and then in order to preserve her own life, mated with a horrifying alien monster. That's like a lot of trauma for one person to endure all at once. And then all of a sudden, the next time we see her, she's just kinda into it? Like, what happened? Kinda feels like a payoff without all the necessary setup. Hopefully future episodes will delve into it a bit more, because I actually am curious about that. The original Alien franchise treats humans as essentially just a food source, so I'm interested to see how Icarus handles the psychological element of this altered universe. And yes, that means I will watch episode 2 when it comes out, though I probably won't be making a video on it. But TLDW, while Icarus wasn't a perfect show, and I definitely have a few complaints, I think it was overall a very good horror experience, and one of the more well-made pieces of Blender animation I've seen. If it's not something that'll totally mess you up, I'd recommend giving it a watch. Thanks for watching. Big thank you to my members, especially my $10 members Bulk Squat Thrust and President Irina Vladimirovna Putina. Oh boy, that's gonna be a fun name to read out in every video. Members got to see this video early, so if that's something you're interested in, you can join them via the join button down below for as little as $1 a month. And if you want to help the channel out for free, liking and subscribing really does go a long way. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments and your advice on camera stuff if you're knowledgeable. Well, once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Play the electro swing.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more.